easier than kids though. I'm actually convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's cute. He's good. He's a good pup.
All right, very cool. Good for you.
Yeah, much needed. It was a bit of a bummer around here.
Yeah, I know, I know. It's amazing what a new puppy can do.
Yeah. So your kids are all good?
Well, define good. They're well, yeah, they're healthy. So
Good.
yeah, no, everybody's good. I'm on Zoom all day. They're on Zoom doing their thing, and so for
Yeah.
the most part.
Yeah. Zoom, zoom.
I know. I'll tell you what. I'm never gonna get on this platform.
I know it feels like forever, right?
No.
The only clean spot that is quiet is my basement that I
Oh yeah.
cleaned and redid. And so that's where I go. But the lighting is new now. I don't like it.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's right.
Very bright.
Everyone's nice and quiet today, huh?
Are you're taking him upstairs with you? Okay. Here, want to see. Is everybody on yet?
We're just waiting for Bill and John. We're just gonna wait a minute.
Did you
And-
guys all happen to see or hear how during yesterday's telephone Supreme Court session, somebody flushed the toilet during one of the attorneys' talk? We want to be careful not to do that ourselves.
You can- Yeah, I'm not gonna, yeah. it's fine. Keep it, make sure you keep an eye on him.
Oh my God, Daisy was right there.
Make sure you keep an eye on him.
Be right back.
Make sure you keep an eye on him.
Right back.
Make sure you keep an eye.
All right, is everybody set? We're at 7:05, so I just want to make sure. All right, and I know Jack's running late. He's still at the job, so he should be joining us shortly. Jack O'Leary. So, with that, if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to
To
the
the
flag
flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We get better at that every week. So, Julie, if you could do the roll, please, I'd appreciate it.
Dawn Bouquet,
Here.
Brian Carso,
Here?
Jessica Decker,
Here.
Jack Fisher,
Here.
Corey Homer,
Here.
Tim Letby, Jack O'Leary, Alicia Sheehan,
Here.
Rosemary Walsh. Here.
Right. Thanks, Julie. With that, I'll turn it over to John, who will give our presentation for the evening. We have one thing on the agenda. So.
All right, good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's hanging in there. I just made some notes to help kick off your part of the budget process. We've been doing it for months, but now this gets to be the tough part. I always said this is the hardest thing we do annually. The only thing worse than us all fighting about budget is then having you guys do my evaluation right after it. So, in the past, we've had some fighting about the tax rates and where it should be and everything, but I think everyone is pretty much on the same page trying to shoot for a 0 this year in light of everything that's going on. We're a big business with over 650 employees. Thankfully, 125 of them are part-timers, so they don't get health benefits, but 650 people, and it constitutes over 80% of the budget. If we don't make budget cuts by eliminating jobs through attrition, among other strategies, we would need approximately a 3% tax increase each and every year because we're so heavy on people in our jobs. We've cut a lot of things out of this proposed budget to get it down to the maximum tax increase of 3.5%. We cut open positions, we reorganized staff to save money in administration, teaching, and support staff. I just wanted to say thanks to Billy and his staff because they've put a tremendous amount of time in this over the last couple of months. And then the last month, really trying to drill down to find savings everywhere we could. When the pandemic hit, that's when we switched gears to saying, okay, what kind of tax increase might there be to how in the world can we get this to 0? Because economically, we're in such a mess across the whole country. So we really tried to set up a presentation tonight to show you large blocks of money that we could possibly use or implement or some kind of strategy with large blocks of money. Because in order to cut the 3.5% of no tax increase, that's about 1.6 million. And we also did another cut of between 400,000 and 500,000 in other revenue reductions. So really we were looking for, after we got the budget down to 3.5, we were looking for another $2 million to cut to get it down to the 0 that we're going to talk about tonight. I know it'll be a long night, but because you guys all have ideas that we'll kick around and have food for thought. So what we'll do is we'll walk you through these sheets, and then we'll open it up so everybody can share their ideas, and then we'll coalesce around some ideas that the group likes. So what we'll do is if we'll turn to, there's a 2-page handout that we sent you earlier today. One is a big long sheet, and it has the current year's budget on the right-hand side and the proposed budget at 3.5 on the left. So we're going to try to walk you through the two sides of it to explain to you what we did that would be different or how it compares current year to next year. And then we'll show you how to get from 3.5 down to 0, okay? So starting on the top left-hand side, you'll see our increases in salaries for professional staff, increases for additional credits accrued for our professional staff, the co-curricular, the increase for support staff, and the increase for administrative staff. There are no new positions proposed in the budget. We had talked about math coaches. We had talked about a possible social worker or therapist for the elementary school. But in light of the current economic climate, we're just trying to see what we can do to hold on to the positions we have. The only reclassifications we have in this first round of budget was, I'll start with the second group there, was to move 2 part-time IAs to full-time. And that was, one was for CTE Auto and the other was for CTE Culinary. They're our 2 biggest, most popular programs, and as you know, when you've toured, they're really big spaces now. So from a supervision standpoint, we were looking to spend that extra money to expand those 2 people to full-time. We also spoke with the union about an MOA, understanding that if we took 2 part-timers up to full-time, that we could cut 2 full-timers in the future if we didn't need them. And because there's a long-standing agreement back from when Dr. Finan was here about not reducing the number of full-time IA positions with, some of you might recall, it was you couldn't replace 1 full-timer with 2 4-hour persons. You couldn't make it like a swap, 2 part-timers for a full-timer. So we've talked to the union about if we were to make this, that we could then, because we'd be upping 2 part-timers to full-timers, we could take 2 full-timers to part-timers later on. But again, that's only about 16,000. And then one of our other juggles was to actually get rid of having a high school librarian and using that to help our special ed numbers in the high school, transfer from a high school librarian to a high school special ed teacher. and then backfilling with some secretaries and other people to staff, NIAs to staff it. So the net result monetarily is actually one of the full-time IAs becomes a full-time secretary. And I can go into that at another time with more details on how that works. But it would be, obviously, it's a different strategy. The high school librarians do not teach classes. So it's a different kind of structure than like you're familiar if you have kids in elementary school and things of that nature. All right, moving to, again, that's only what, 33,000 total, those moves, but that's can be up for conversation later. Then the savings from replacements, attrition, and budget adjustments. From a budgetary standpoint, we were fortunate to have 13 retirements. Because as you know, if we're going to replace those positions, there's a breakage between the upper salary at the top of the scale and people coming in at the lower steps of the scale. Of the 13 retirements, we're looking to eliminate 2 teaching positions. They would both be elementary. Both Shahola and DVES have large 5th grades that are going to the middle school. The middle school can absorb them. So we would eliminate 2 elementary positions there. Thankfully, we had 3 elementary teachers retiring. So it wasn't laying somebody off. You could lose the positions through attrition. We also just recently had a phys ed retirement, and we're looking to see if we can staff that with only a half a person. So it'd be half a salary, half the benefits, and no medical. So that's a big savings there. And then the administrative savings, that's what all the reorganization that I've been showing for the last year or so with, reducing the salaries and having one less person in the cabinet and having lower level administrators and things of that nature. And then we had several retirements and support staff, which gives you some breakage between old and new. And then we are looking to cut two regular ed IAs that recently resigned. So we were able to cut those. That's where that 40,000 comes from. And then the 15,865, that would be having the middle school, Dingman's Middle School have one drama show the way DVMS and the high school do. Instead of them having 2 shows and the other 2 schools having 1 show, they would all have 1 show. So that's where all those red numbers come from in the cuts. So that's what, 450, 500, about 550,000 in cuts there. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Billy to start with the health insurance line.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. With the health insurance, on the left-hand side, you'll see that the actuary is recommending that budget to budget, because if you look on the right-hand side, we had planned on using 447,000 worth of reserves last year. We would need $1.1 million. In this first draft, we were planning on using 422,000. So the budget, if we were able to do the left-hand side here, would increase 732,000. The retirement rate is increasing, thank God, not as much as it was, but it goes from 34.29 to 34.51. Based on all the wages, that is 291,000. Social Security, which is 0.0765 of the additional wages, is 47,000. Workers' comp quotes aren't in yet, but the early indication from our agent is that it's going to be a $40,000 reduction. We worked on textbooks, John, and the administration, and from the original list that they had, they reduced and deferred 253,000. So as of right now, it's $152,000 increase. We'll talk more about that when we get to page 2. The presentations that you saw a couple months ago on cyber charter school tuition and DV cyber, they reflect that $47,000 reduction in outside cyber with our increase of 87,000. Moving down, the budgetary reserve, we kept at the current level of $100,000. So there's no change there, budget to budget. Copier costs, we reconfigured a couple schools to save money for about $27,000. The school budgets based on enrollment and the amount we give them was $12,000. The presentation that you saw on transportation and building and operation, 27,000 reduction. We were able to reduce the competitions by $38,000. Administration worked on getting a no work order software. And that's a $17,000 reduction. And then various categories in the next two categories, board and legal, we dropped 10,000, and the superintendent's business office, tax collection and staff development, we dropped about $32,000. So the net budget expenditure increase under normal conditions, you would need about $1.8 million. And if you go across the page, you can see last year we needed $2.1 million. And again, that's after the retirements that we have, so that you have the new staff or replacement staff, you pay less, and then losing a couple of positions by attrition. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that the picture's not going to change much on an annual basis. Down below, the real estate tax, now I'm going to go to revenues now. What's in this draft of the budget? Real estate taxes is 129,000, reflects additional assessed value that was put on the ranks or on the rolls by the Pike County Assessment Office since July 1st of 2019. And there was actually a slight uptick in the collection percentage, and we'll talk about that as we move forward also. In this first draft, I put in there, I was trying to get the delinquent tax down about $100,000 a year. So at this point, we're starting at that point, and we'll talk about that later. Interest earnings is pretty much a known. I mean, we've done a lot of research, and it appears that we are going to receive about 1/3 at best of what we are receiving this year in interest. So that amount is dropping from by $375,000 in the budget line item. IDA is increased by $14,000. In this first draft of the budget, we have included, because we want to let the legislators know that we plan on receiving what the governor's proposal was in February. So that's the basic subsidy, 106,000, special ed at 93, career and tech ed 42. Social Security reimbursement and retirement reimbursement are, again, we get reimbursed by the wages, the expense on the wages that we pay. So that's the reflection of the expenses on top being reimbursed at about 56%. The transportation subsidy is projected to be at 79,000. If you recall, we refinanced a bond and we're paying less in debt service. So therefore, we're going to get less reimbursement. That's a reflection. That's how the state formula works. So first draft budget without a tax increase is $120,000 versus the 1.8 million you saw in increased expenses in this draft. Therefore, that's the starting point. We wanted you, to see, like, if you were going to have a typical annual budget, we put them side by side to each other so you could get a feel for that. And at this juncture, that 1.65 million represented if we could do the index at 3.5. And then we will turn to page 2 as our starting point of some thoughts, and I'm sure people have other thoughts on how we go from 3.5 down to 0. Do I have any questions on the first page of where we got to this point?
Yeah, Bill, a question on the health insurance.
Sure.
1.154, that's the amount that was determined by whom?
Well, the increase is the actuaries who are we have an actuary firm that looks at all the data in the trust, and they take claims. They look back 6 months, they look back a year and a half, they look back 3 years, and they actuarial determine what they recommend we need to fund that. This year, I think it was a 7% increase is what they had projected. But I mean, in
Okay. And what's
reality,
the maximum amount of monies that we have in reserve with them?
you froze on me, Jack. I didn't.
He's back.
You back?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, you froze. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
What's the maximum amount we can take out of the reserves on the healthcare trust?
I actually sent a text to our actuary because I saw your email before we came into the meeting. But my understanding is that we have to have 6 months of reserves in the trust in order for us to take what they call a funding holiday. So what I asked them is could we take, instead of the 421 that I'm saying there, take the full 1.1 million,
Right.
which, I mean, our monthly bill now next year is 1,047,000 a month. So it's like just in excess of 1 month. And it's a little tricky question, and I can only say a little bit about it, but our level is about 7 months now, but we had some difficult claims, and I'm hoping that by the reinsurance program, the balance that's there, and that's another question I asked him on the text, we might be more like at 8 months. So then the answer to that question, he's not going to recommend it because, but we can do it. Obviously, if he is correct, then we are going to start in a worse place next year. But in these times, we know we're going to have to use, thank God we have reserves to go to. And if we want to use these reserves and take our chance, because maybe his estimates will be high, who knows? Use those reserves and maybe not use or not have to hit as much of our reserves that we have in our coffers. It's a consideration that I'll try and get verified if we can, and then we'll just make a decision if we want to do that. But if he's correct, then we are 1.1 million kind of behind the number we need to fund there. But you never know, maybe over the years, we'll be able to build it back up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think we're talking 1.1 million as a possible place to start our discussion.
Correct. And if I'm correct on where I think we're going to end up at the end of the year, the reserves, if everything happens, would go from just over 8 months down to more like 7 months, and we would still be a month ahead of where we couldn't take any borrowings out. So, and I don't want to call it a borrowing. It's kind of like you just take a holiday of not paying it in and hope that, God bless you, Felicia, it works out.
Sorry.
No problem. Is that
Bless you.
answer that, Jack?
Yeah, Bill.
And I'll
And
find out.
my opinion is we should use their money before we start use their reserves before we start using our reserves.
Okay. So then we're going to begin that we need $1.65 million. What I am recommending is that from underspending from this year, there were middle school science textbooks, if you recall, that were in last year's budget, that this is year two of the purchase. I would recommend we purchase that from underspending this year for 2 reasons. And I mentioned I want to talk about textbooks. We'll get down further here where there's potential money, federal stimulus money from the CARES Act. When the ARRA money years ago was given to school districts, it was the best way to use that is for one-time purchases rather than for operating costs. And I'm fearful that if we planned on doing it for textbooks and, for example, technology equipment purchases that are currently in this budget, I don't want to be paying for year 2, meaning the purchase order and the delivery was made last summer, so I would recommend paying that out of 1920 and then instead of trying to pay for this textbook out of new federal monies. I think that would not be wise. The purchase of transportation equipment from this year's underspending, we're going to have underspending, so I'm thinking it's a wise way instead of hitting up the capital reserve at this year. Next year, we may have to hit up the capital reserve, but maybe use this year's underspending to buy what was presented a couple months ago. And the same thing with that 10,000 in the operation of the building. And likewise with the Chris Ross's presentation of 11,000. So purchase those things now instead of trying to classify them as capital next year and or trying to get money from the CARES Act, which we'll talk again. I believe our electric cost, Marvin and myself have been working on getting the electrical service converted that you guys voted on last month. I believe we can drop our costs by $30,000. Now, the proposed cyber school legislation, it seems to be gaining a little bit of traction, but there's no guarantee. But schools are definitely talking about it. And it certainly is a way for the legislators to this is not asking them for any more money. This is simply creating a formula that is fair and doesn't give cyber charters outrageous money. So if that were to pass, and this is one of those where if we have it on our books and we try and get some traction out of it and leverage our legislators statewide, we would put this in here during these times to reduce our expenses and hope the legislation during these times, because again, it's not asking for any more money from the legislators. It's just trying to get something right. So I hope they have the stomach to do it. And at that point, I had recommended to use more health insurance reserves than the 421,000 on the front page. If it's, I could go along with, as long as our actuary and the trust was okay with it. If people like Jack's suggestion of using the trust money first, then that might change some of the numbers below. Now, real estate tax reduction in the next bracket. We look back now, 2008, when the last recession hit in 1.2 is thank God we don't have an earned income tax. I remember years ago when that was on the ballot, we had to put it on the ballot. 9 out of 10 people in Pike County shot it down. It makes no sense in Pike County because there's so many second homeowners paying property taxes that it didn't make sense. And our public and our citizens were really smart on voting. I remember our board member, Deb Descharme, led the charge on that. She was wonderful. And that got shot down. School districts with an earned income tax are really have a much more difficult. But when we look back, the percentage of collection went down, well, actually less than 1%. I used 1% here. I know who knows what's going to happen. I would like to think that those that have paid their escrow at the banks will pay them. Our second homeowners, since they maybe have a second home because they're New York State and out of state and maybe a little more able to pay their taxes. I dropped it 1%. I'm sure that's up for argument. We're not raising taxes, so depending on what we do there would make a difference on what we do with this page. But at this point, we're recommending we drop it 1%. On revenue increases, John got a letter that their Delaware Valley would be eligible for $480,000. It's not clear exactly how the states, it comes through the states, not clear how they're handling it, but I'm certainly hope we get our portion of what is to come to us. I gave back the 100,000 in delinquent taxes, not a year to try and get that tighter. Who knows what's going to go on with delinquent taxes? The good news is our first 3 quarters this year were good to the point I thought we were going to make our budget. I can't tell you what these 3 months, April, May, and June are gonna look like, but at least we're on track to hit our budget this year. But I won't be able to tell you that till July. Real estate transfer, there is one theory that says, Peg, Peg thinks we're gonna grow, and she thinks that's gonna grow, so I increased it by $50,000. And then what we were short then to balance the budget, and we have to have a balanced budget of about $702,000. We have the PACERS rate adjustment committed fund balance and the OPEB GASB 75 fund balance, and we can split it up any way we want or additional on top of that if we were to plan otherwise from what's on this sheet. There was a lot there. I take questions from anybody and we'll go from there.
Well, just to get the narrative started, I do believe that if all we're looking at is a 1% drop in collections, well, then this economic problem, it's not too bad, because we've had 1% drops even in years where the economy is good. Now, the economy was humming, probably the best it's ever been, but only 1% drop is going to happen, I think it's a little too much for me to stomach. I think we're looking at least 5%, if not 10%. And 5% would blow this whole schedule you have out of the water. So I think we need to start worst case scenario and work from there, and not use a 1%, which is kind of like almost nothing.
Well, the thing about it is, we could all go around and all pick a different number. We just went back to the research, and the research that during the Great Recession, the worst recession we've ever had, except for the Depression, we were shocked it was only a 1%, less than a 1% difference. Now, obviously, could it be more than that? Yeah. I think one of the things I want to talk about philosophically with everybody is that if we're going to end up plugging holes with reserves, there's a couple different ways we can be very extreme with devaluing our revenues now and cut things for kids, and then in the spring, if we were overzealous, we're going to say we just cheated kids out of all this stuff because we were guessing at these numbers. If we play it a little closer to the vest and we need to take more out of reserves at the end of the year, at least we'll know we didn't cut programs for kids. So there's two mentalities there. We can be more draconian on the front end, and there's no way to fix it for the kids in May or June when we find out. Or we say, hey, we're not gonna be so rash or extreme on the front end with the idea that we'll cover ourselves with fund balance at the end, or borrowing it at a very low rate. So I just don't want everybody to go extreme now when we're guessing. We're all at a stage where we're doing a lot of PFA, pluck from air, and when we don't have any science behind some of the percentages. So I just ask everybody to just be careful we don't go too extreme and then get to the end and say, oh man, I can't believe we have all this money left, that it was better than we thought, or things bounce back a little better than we thought. So just my 2 cents.
So John, if I could ask, if we go that route and we come up with 3 or 4% drop in revenue, how would we make up for it?
The way I'm kind of quick looking at it here is if we were to use the EBTEP reserve, and let's use round numbers and say we're going to use 700,000 more there. And in this version, then you would not use on the bottom, the plan use of committed fund balance there. Then if for every percent you want to take it down, then on paper, then you would say, so if you dropped it 2 more percent, we're going to go to the health insurance trust to cover, not you, but then if you did 1 or 2%, you would just put them in for the using our fund balance. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yeah, so if that's what we would do a year from now, if we find ourselves with a big deficit because the revenues dropped beyond what we anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, by law, give a balanced budget. So we basically want to map out the best we can, and then whatever happens, you can't control it. Thank God. The one other thing I do want to mention is our financial advisors talked to me today. I've been talking to them. We have another bond issue that during the summer can be refinanced. A month ago, we just, if you remember, we saved like $225,000. I was thinking, like, things are worse out there. I was planning on saving another 225,000. And he indicated there wasn't any savings. Our next bond issue had a lower interest rate to start with. And the way the bond market was working, wasn't working as good. We hit it at extremely low time. So I was disappointed. I felt like I lost $225,000. But he called me today and he said he worded it is there is a bank that's being extremely aggressive on giving loans and to refinance loans. And he believes that if we could possibly save $150,000 if we were to put an RFP out there. So I'll leave it up to the board if they want. He would pursue that. And again, a month ago, he told me there wasn't any savings, but I guess this bank that's being aggressive, and he could do it via an RFP, and we may be able to save $150,000. Is everybody okay with me giving him the okay? And I put on next week's board meeting the authority for him to go pursue an RFP?
Yes.
Okay.
So Bill, what I was asking was, what do you think this year's estimated surplus is going to be?
That's a great question.
I know.
I mean, I hedge in normal times.
I know.
There is still, I'll say, pending legislation or litigation, or a lot of this stuff is being sifted out as far as what obligations we have to pay, what ones we may or may not be able to renegotiate, like with our transportation contractor. But if I was going to put a number out there, and please don't hold me to it, I'm going to say that our expenses, well, let me just say our surplus probably will be in the neighborhood of 1.25 to 1.5 million. And that could go, either way. I mean, I mentioned on the revenue side, I thought we were doing really good after 3 quarters. I can't tell you what's going to happen to transfer tax and delinquent tax this last quarter, but I'm hoping that with where I thought we were ahead a little bit, that may at least will be flat. And then hopefully we will be able to, because of some of the things we're not expending money on, the competitions and things like that, field trips that typically occur, the athletic officials that we don't have to pay, and just school supplies that are not going to be purchased. And then you have some of the categories of substitutes, teachers, and things like that. But I really don't want to say too much about the staffing and things like that, because there's still a lot that's to be determined, so to say. But if you're going to hold me to a number and ask that question, and my best guess will be, I'll just say 1.25 million, and that'll be the best guess. And I'll try and refine that as we go along.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
So getting back to reserves, and I hate to talk so much, but I wrote you all an email. I hope you all received it. I do think it's time that we start using the PSERS rate adjustment reserve for the PSERS rate increase. Therefore, that number, which I have last year's number in the audit report, this year's increase is 290,000. So matching that with reserve money, I think, is a fiscally prudent, fiscally way to use the reserve. And if you're putting on the floor $1.2 million to $1.5 million, I think it would be really conservative of us to have $1 million of that utilized for next year's taxes, so that we can utilize that. And this way, if you do come in at $1.5 million, we still have an extra 500,000. If you come in at $1.2 million, which was on the low end, it's still good. Therefore, we're using the reserves for the purpose they were intended, and not worrying about down the road. And every year we can do this. It's kind of like the John Wilbeski method. We're using that reserve over a long period of time. I don't know if we had an OPEB increase, Bill. That was one of my questions.
Well, you're talking actuarially, or there's
No, you got away from that when I was gone. But let's say just on a cash basis, like you're doing now, are you foreseeing an increase in OPEB expenditures in 2021?
Oh, those are probably in the neighborhood of I would say $525,000 if I was going to put a number out there.
Of an increase?
No, total. Meaning, if you're saying, I think you're saying that for the piecers, you're saying that since the increase is 286,000, we could use 286,000. Is that?
298.28 is the number.
298.28, right. Now that's the increase in retirement after people leave, come back, you know what I mean? That type of thing. So if that's what you're saying there, the amount of post-employment benefits is in that range of 525,000.
The increase or the
No.
or from last year to this year?
Well, that's the retirees. But if you're talking about since day one that the person steps their foot in the place, that's
No.
right.
He means, what was the cost this year compared to what we think it is next year? And what was the difference?
Well, this year's not done, but I'm telling you, last year's at audit time, it was right around $500,000. Now, what happens there is there are people that then turn 65 and fall off and come on, but that's a number that gets derived when the years end because people might fall off the insurance today. I mean, so I think the best number I can give you is 18-19's actual was 500 and right, just over 500,000.
Okay.
We didn't use it for, I mean, what's included for the retirees is an estimate that gets paid into the trust. We don't pay a per person type thing. So
Right.
if somebody leaves, so it's in the 500, but the increase would be marginal depending on who fell off and who came on, if you follow me.
Yeah, that's my point is we're not looking at a $500,000 increase in the OPEB.
No,
We're
I'm
looking
saying
at a very small $50,000.
yeah.
Similar year to year.
So I'd like,
I look at the reserves a little bit differently, I guess. And if you're using it just for an increase in the piecers rate stopped increasing, then I think you can use it for your ongoing expenses, if you follow me.
when that happens, I agree with you. I'm not sure we're going to live to see that happen.
I think we almost did, but
Yeah.
and then-
Well, after the last 6 weeks of market returns, I think the Peasers fund may have taken a significant, if not mortal, hit to it, but we'll find that out later on. But I would like to just maintain the fiscal discipline of using the reserves for their intended purpose. And then this year's surplus, we will not reserve any of it. We'll just leave it as unreserved or unassigned. I don't know what the word is anymore. And use that to plug our difference, which you have at 702,000. So that's how I would handle the reserves, because we always want to go back to the bank in a very strong balance sheet position. And if we start pushing down that money and spending it, when we go back to refinance every year, we're going to look less and less stellar. So I want to maintain that if you follow my drift on it.
That makes sense.
So I was expecting to come on and really discuss a lot of expenditures and areas that we could cut expenditures. But I will say that, especially not knowing what next year holds, if there are other ways for us to get down to zero, and I've sat on the board and with Jack for many years talk about, making sure that we put money back into the reserves, and I do trust you that if you're telling us that now is the time to use those reserves and potentially look at some of those expenditures for next year, when we don't really know what's going to happen, that's something that I do, like I said, I do listen to you for a long time, and I respect your opinion, and you obviously know more about this than I do, and the number of years that you've asked us to put money into PSERS reserves. If you're telling us that now's the time to use those reserves, then I do trust that this might be the time to the programs and everything that we have for our students, with some minor modifications at the status quo, and use some of our reserves to zero, then I think that I fully support that.
Thank you. Yep.
Bill, could you explain the textbook? On the first sheet, you had an amount of 152,438. And on the second sheet, there was recommending using 64,000 from underspending. How are we making up the difference there? Or what, this year we didn't get a list of what the new textbooks were going to be. Do we know what the new textbooks are going to be?
There are 3 AP science textbooks.
Are you turned on?
In the bottom corner, drag your mouse.
There you go.
Lower left corner
Whoops.
again. Shoot.
There you go.
I turned my picture off too, so I'll put it back on. There are 3 AP science textbooks, one for AP biology, one for AP physics 1, and one for AP physics C. They're 2 different classes. There is the big adoption is geometry. That's across the board for every student that takes geometry. It's like a full course adoption, so that's big. There's an 8th grade social studies textbook, and I believe that's pretty much it. There might be I think there's a small, for web development, there's a course, a textbook, but that's, an elective, it's a smaller textbook adoption. But that's, I think, pretty much covers them off the top of my head.
And in the past, we normally have the list for you in May, but we pushed it off to June because it was hard. Normally, we are able to collect the samples from the high school and all the schools and put them in this room for you to look at them.
Right.
And we don't even know where to look for them. So Peg's working on a process of creating links so that you can look at online links to the textbooks between now and next June, with a meeting in June. That way from home, you can take a peek at them and you don't have to come in here and wear a mask or whatever to look at the books and
I
stuff.
have some of them, but not all of them. And to lay them out, it would be kind of pointless. You guys can't see them from there. So I was going to get the link, so at least you could go in and see a sample of the books. And we'll get that out definitely for the work session in June. So
How old are the ones that they're replacing?
they're all 10 years or more.
10 years or more.
Or there is a major change in AP, one or the other.
Okay. So the 64 that's listed on page 2.
That's the second year adoption of the middle school science.
That's in addition to the 152,000 on page 1.
152, yes.
It's in addition to that. It's not part of that. Okay, thank you.
Approximately $30,000 per school for the 2 middle schools.
Just regarding textbooks, what we're looking to do is buy some of them with this year money. We have some in next year's budget, and we push some to the following year as well. Like there was supposed to be 6th grade and 8th grade social studies, and we were doing 8th grade and we pushed 6th grade to the following year. We're trying to spread out these costs more in hopes that it'll help us balance our books, because the next budget's going to be just as hard as this one, if not harder, because we won't have a surplus like that from having it. Well, hopefully we'll have a whole year of school, but then the downside of that is you won't have the surplus you have this year, and you're not going to have the CARES money either. So the next one looks tougher. So that's why if we can figure out whatever we can do in big chunks to balance this one, and then take a running list of things that we may want to do business differently going forward for that next budget, because that's the one that scares me even more.
Well, and I think that, I mean, I know that we're pushing some of those textbooks off, but if we come to find out that we have 1.5 million instead of 1.25 million in surplus this year, I think that this is the year, if we have those extra funds to purchase some of those textbooks that we're pushing off to next year or the year after, use them as a one-time purchase, so that next year when our budget is, chances are, is going to be just as hard, if not more difficult, then we're not trying to, offset and push those textbooks off another year or two then. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that any of those one-time purchases that we can use with those CARE Act or, with our surplus this year, I think that we need to kind of keep those in that column 3 and purchase those now if we can.
And we can.
And we're with you on
We
that
can
too.
come back, just like there were others that were bigger. There were some we could move off. So we have gone through the TPEC process with several other books, but then we went back to the department chairs and the people teaching the courses and kind of looked at what were the non-negotiables, what were the things that we absolutely had to have for next year,
Right.
like those APs. And and we certainly, if there is a surplus, we'll bring those to you as well, and we can take a look at that even in July. If we know in
Right.
July,
I mean, nothing needs to be done right now, and that's not budgetary, as far as where we're looking at for next year, right? But I do think that those are some of those areas that I don't think that next year's budget is going to look any better than this year's budget, and I think it's going to look worse. So I do think that some of those one-time expenditures that we're pushing off, we should think about doing when we can.
and likewise, just in some years when we have a surplus, we can buy them with this year's funds for the following year. And that's something we could even think about in April next year. If there is a surplus after we get through the audit and all those kinds of things, we can look at those books that we pushed off, during the 2021 school year, and then say, do we want to spend the money that way? It doesn't have to be for August, for the start of school.
Have we-
I'm sorry, Corey.
No, I was just going to ask if we've gotten any additional guidelines on what the CARES Act funding can be used for. I know K through 12 is a little different than what we have in higher ed as far as expenditures put under the CARES Act.
Yeah, they gave us a list. You can't read it, but they gave us a list of things, and the 480 is an estimate. It was a total, Pennsylvania got a total of 471 million for the CARES Act for elementary, secondary schools. But it's things, it can be things such as Chromebooks,
Okay.
purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities.
It's pretty broad.
It's very broad. There's 12 different categories. And
All right.
like I said that, yeah. And as long as they're not gonna be super, super, super strict, if they're gonna be loose on this, then that gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility working through this budget process. It would be,
I know at the college level, we have to give 50% to the students, and they're not even making us have the students prove anything. We're just give the student money, and we don't have to keep record of it. So it's very odd.
yeah. Well, that's an example where they didn't think about commuter schools versus residential schools, because residential schools had to give away millions in room and board back percentages. So that was easy for them to cover it. For you, that's harder. Yeah.
It is. Well, I think what you said, John, earlier makes a lot of sense as far as the tax rate. With statistics, you can only go back to your best, your closest case scenario, which is kind of what you did in 2008. So I appreciate that. And I think with all modeling, this situation just throws all modeling out of whack. You have no idea what we're going to look like in 2 months from now, let alone 6 months or let alone a year. So I kind of like the way Jack has it laid out, and Bill, slow playing this a little bit to see kind of where we are. And I think we keep, like Jess said, keep spending these different funds throughout the year.
So Bill, what I'm thinking of is spreadsheets, if we're using that as a template. Above the planned use of committed fund balance, we'd have a line item that would say planned use of unassigned reserve balance. And there's where you put your $1 million, which is going to flow over this year. Not $1.5 million, not $1.25 million. We'll be conservative. We'll say $1 million total. And then I think what we should do is take that real estate tax reduction and up it $1 million. And this way we've balanced those two out. And when you have your general health fund addition of 450,000, the use of the total 1.1 million, that shortfall drops from 854 to 400. And then when you put in your million, take out your million, and then use the PSERS of 290, 828, the difference can then go to. You follow me on that? And this way we've maintained all the programs for the kids.
Hey, Jack, just for a second, turn your, click your stop video while you're talking on this, because you're cutting out a little bit. And when you stop your video, it increases your bandwidth for your audio.
Okay.
Just try that just while we're doing these real important details, because then you won't cut out on our end. Go ahead.
Better? So Bill, I was saying that on your template that you've done, above the planned use of committed fund balance, put a line in planned use of unassigned fund balance or reserve of $1 million. And this way, we're not holding you to the $1,250,000, $1,500,000, we're holding you to $1 million. If we get $1,250,000, $1,500,000, Jessica's right. We can then spend that on the things later on. But I do think the real estate tax collection rate has to be increased at that $1 million also. Because I think although maybe I'm being overcautious, I think this downturn is 3 times what we saw 8 or 9 years ago, where it was a slow degradation of the economy. This has been a punch to the nose, and people are going to go in, and I have lots of clients that are asking for the deferment of their mortgage, and I've told them, but you have to pay your real estate taxes. But if they're choosing between food and real estate taxes, they know they can put their real estate taxes off a couple of years until things turn around. So I really think the 1%.
So do $1 million
But I think we should be at least 3 to 4%. And there's that $1 million of reserve. It creates a problem for next year. I know that. But we need to get through 2021.
I think the other thing that we're going to see a lot of is I don't think that a lot of businesses are going to be able to recover from this. I know we're talking about home deferred, but I think that businesses are going to really struggle with this as well. I think that people are trying to support them as much as they can right now, but people aren't going to have the money to spend. So I do agree with Jack that I think that this is going to be a bigger issue than we think that it is. The other thing that and I know Felicia, if you want to touch on it, I know Felicia had sent an email as far as I know right now we're obligated to pay coaches and I believe extracurriculars as well. Or we're paying co-curriculars.
The Act 13 says that people aren't supposed to make any more or any less than what they would normally have made if there wasn't a pandemic. But every lawyer has a different interpretation about what that means. So we've been going around and around with that. So we don't have a definitive answer. Obviously, we know the big ticket, everybody's regular pay. But whether you get your full coaching pay for the spring or you get your full club, we've had different opinions from people around the state, and different districts are doing different things. So So we don't have a definitive answer on exactly how much we have to pay everybody right now because we've got dueling opinions out there. So somebody said, yeah, you got to pay the coaches, but you wouldn't pay them any extra weeks that they normally would get if they made the playoffs because they didn't make the playoffs, but they'd get their base, you know, whatever we approved back in June. And the same thing with club advisors. But then there were different opinions saying that maybe they only have to get a portion of it. And then there was another opinion that said if a club hadn't started yet, it was going to be something that was going to be in April, May, and June, that because it hadn't started, you wouldn't have to pay them. But then we've got the whole other extreme where people are saying, you know, I should be getting exactly what I got last spring, you know, and unions are involved and stuff like that. So I don't want to go into too
So-
great a detail publicly about that part of it. So.
Right. I mean, and I guess for me, this year it's the old, it is what it is. I'm just looking in how do we protect the budget, so to speak, in those terms for next year. We're already talking not going back in the fall. Let's be honest. It's out there. So, and I have some really big concerns about that cyber school budget being, if we're not back in the fall and when they make that announcement, I just have this feeling that our cyber school budget is going to go through the roof. So how can we protect a bit so that if we don't have a fall season, those things can be not part of whatever it is that we're approving?
Act 13 expires on June 30th. So all bets are off on July 1. It was approved as a stopgap measure to get through the school year. Billy and I spoke to Mike Pfeiffer yesterday. He called us when we were in doing budget stuff. He called my cell and we talked about the fact that it was merely, they were trying to just get everybody through. But I will tell you, if we were to start online in the fall, and there is nothing like an Act 13, we could look very different in terms of having to furlough people.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, it's still too early to tell what's going to happen because so much can happen in 4 months in terms of whether we'll be online or not. If I was a betting person, I'm not, but if I was, I'd be betting that we'll be in school because the parents are going to be so sick and tired of the kids. They're going to do everything in their power to help us get.
I have very strong opinions. I think, I don't want to get into it too much and whatever, but they should be back in school. It'll be time and for a multitude of reasons. So.
Do we have that list in June? Can we wait until July or August?
You could approve in July. You wouldn't want to wait till August because a lot of stuff starts happening before then. And from a liability standpoint, if we're going to start up with activities, we need to have them covered as employees, out on the fields and stuff like that. And we could take that June list and make it a July list. And we could also, if you want, from athletics, we could do it seasonal and just approve the fall coaches instead of doing fall, winter, and spring. We could take it in 3 chunks rather, just as a protective measure.
I think, we definitely learned a little bit in this process of all that's going on. And I think at this point, that might be the prudent thing to do.
We learned
Just
a
my
ton
opinion.
in kind.
We're still learning.
That's right.
John,
Yeah.
it's Dawn. First, I'm getting a horrible reverb. If everybody can hit mute when they're not talking. I don't know if everybody's getting that, but it's going on forever. Has there been any thought or discussion or concern about compensatory education? Because there's a lot of parents who are talking about regression with the kids through this whole process and not being in school and IEPs and whatnot. And to the best of my knowledge, the feds have not suspended IDEA. Am I correct in that? Okay, so how does that play in?
I can't quantify it in terms of a budget conversation. because I don't know that, that'll take some work between Maria and Cheryl and the parents to try to figure out where we are with that. But again,
John, I
that
can
comes
weigh
back to Jack's comment. Oh, Maria's here. Okay. But that could also come back to Jack's comment of only allocating 1 million, because that would leave some extra, because there are a lot of unexpected or unknowns, and that would give us protection. Go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to say, of course, that is very much an unknown. We don't know, first of all, how our kids are going to do through all of this. Obviously, there's going to be some challenges for many kids. Our plan, obviously, is to reassess all the students once we get back to brick and mortar, and make a determination if there are a need for future services. And from there, if we can do those services during the school day, obviously we'll do that. And if there's a need for anything beyond that, we'll just address that when it comes. But to quantify that right now would be impossible.
Is there any opportunity to catch some of the kids up through extended school year? Is that something that we can do?
Well, at this point,
Well, we
we've
can't now,
determined that extended school year, we've determined is now going to be online. So at this point, that wouldn't be the case. And part of the issue is kids qualify for extended school year based on previous breaks. For example, over last summer, data is collected, and for newer students, we use Christmas break. So there's no change in students who will qualify for extended school year based on this, because we haven't had an opportunity to see if there are any regression and recoupment issues yet.
Back to the terminology on the fund balance, I'm gonna have to check with the auditor. If you recall, in October, when we approved the fund balances, it says that it's part of the new GASB thing where you approve where you're gonna put your committed fund balances, and that you plan on using or could use or adjusting them during the school year or whatever. So the technical part of using this year's fund balance, if it's all committed, I have to look into the wording, whether we can change it to use of unassigned or move it from committed to unassigned by another motion. I don't want to get in the weeds, but I just got to put it out there that I may have to talk to the auditor to see how exactly we do that. But I do believe if we're using fund balance to balance the budget, we have to have it as part of the motion, but I'll do some research on that.
I ask a question of both Bill and Jack Fisher. I mean, what do you guys think in terms of strategy? Is it better to estimate a 1% decrease in revenue? If it comes out that we have a 2 or 3% decrease, we make up for the shortfall after the fact? Or is it better to anticipate the larger shortfall and see what happens with that? Do we place ourselves in any kind of disadvantage one way or the other? You follow?
Like I said, my opinion is we use reserves that are currently with somebody else right now, not our own. So utilizing the healthcare reserve, to me, is to its full extent is the first best move we can make. I know, Bill, you serve on the board there, so maybe that's not your feelings on it. But certainly, I would rather conservatively estimate everything, including what we're going to be receiving, what their thoughts are, than to think we're going to receive money, plan on spending it, and then not having it. So if personally, I think we'll have a 4 to 5% reduction in collections this year. And then if the economy improves, of course, we eventually get all of our money. I mean, that might be 2 or 3 years down the road. The third year is when things really start to heat up for folks who are waiting to pay it. So I would prefer that we increase our estimate of the uncollected amount from, I think, Bill, you're currently at 91.79. bring it down to 89.79, and it adds about another $1 million in loss there, and then use that surplus from this year to plug that gap.
But what happens if we don't do that? What if we anticipate a 1% decrease and say it comes in at 3%?
And we're short.
Well, how do we make up for that
You would
short?
end up with, at the end, in a perfect world, at the end of the year, then we would end up using that difference. You would use more of your fund balance than you had planned on.
Right.
And Brian, he's talking about using money out of either PSERS or OPEB fund balance. If we were so low that the unassigned was already exhausted, that you'd have to dip into those other. Jack's thinking is if you allocate that million of unspent first before you touch the reserve accounts, it's just a way to try to protect the reserve accounts as long as you can.
As long as you can. Exactly, John.
Yeah. Jack, this is Pam. Hi, everyone. I am in total support of what you are saying. I remember way back when we put money into reserves, saying that rainy day may come, and it's here. So I support you totally.
Thank you. It's more than raining financially. It's
a
hurricane.
Looks like some snow this weekend too. So
VOTEC kids are building an ark.
Bill, I had a question for you. I was trying to watch earlier from work with the YouTube, and did you say we'd have a 1.2? Is that what you projected for the remaining balance of this year's budget?
That's what I projected, yeah.
We
Okay.
can't hold them to that though, Jack. Remember.
No, I understand it's a crystal ball. It's just a prediction, but it's a nicer neighborhood.
So one of the issues we need to talk about before next week is this $340,000 of proposed cyber school additional monies that we'll be saving. And Bill, you really need to keep us up to speed on that, because that could be the monkey wrench in all of this. That's $340,000. And when we're talking big money, that's a big money item. And I think you need to have a backup plan to take some of your, if the 340 is just not going to happen by June 30th with this legislature, we need to have $340,000 of backup cuts. And I've proposed already that we take out and eliminate a lot of the travel and conferences and maybe save 100,000 there, and then maybe move a lot of these capital items that we were planning on purchasing with operating funds. Maybe we could save another 100,000 there just as a backup, that if this 340 just falls through the floor, we've got a plan to plug that 340 gap that is not tremendously disruptive and doesn't take anything away from kids. Because I think one of the things we're all agreeing on is do no harm to kids, Brian. So we want to make sure that we maintain all the programs. And that 340, I hadn't even thought that until I got your email, I didn't even know that was something to talk about. So keep your thumb on Pfeiffer and Brown and make sure they know we need that money. Otherwise, we do need to have a backup to that 340. It seems like the only weak link in this template right now that I've kind of redone is that 340.
Yeah, and Jack, in addition to that, like that's the proposed to bring it down to a flat rate of 9,500. But what if the legislation, when it goes through, say just a random number brings it to 12,000 instead of 9,500? There's still going to be a piece of that 340 missing.
Yeah,
I muted. You're right, Jack. Absolutely.
We can go back to the expenditure side and look at some examples. Like Jack had talked about conferences. We still need to leave travel mileage in there for people that travel from buildings to buildings and stuff like that. But we could take a look at conferences. We could take a look at field trips. We could look at our crowd control budget for events, because we have crowd control at a lot of outdoor events, but we don't have large crowds. So that's something that we could take a peek at. Yeah, so we were just making a list earlier of some other things we could do to say, what would we do to backfill if that falls through, I guess is the best way to say it. We're not gonna find 340, but whatever we can find means that's less money whatever we find, that's that much less we don't have to take out of reserves.
On the capital, I just want to, it's all going to be a moving target too. I mean, I think we could, the CARES Act, again, we want to spend it on one-time money. So we want to, the capital that would be for technology, and then the textbooks I talked about, we'd have to make sure that that matches the CARES money, the 480,000 federal, that would have to then stay within general fund. So John and I will talk about that too.
There's also a real push by a lot of the state legislators going back to the cyber charter campaign. There were bills that were proposed that would not allow any school districts to raise taxes this year. So I think that this is kind of a good opportunity, not just with, Lisa Baker and my friend Rosemary Brown, but to also reach out to some of the other state senators that are really pushing that if you don't want us to be able, if you don't want us to raise taxes this year, then, if you make some real cyber charter reform legislation, then that would be an opportunity for us to save money, which would obviously then in turn save our taxpayers money. So I think perhaps this is an opportunity for us to reach out, not just locally, but to some of those legislators as well, and traction for us and for all the other school districts as well.
And all our state organizations are pushing for it. One of the bills was to just have no tax increases. There was that came out of one of the committees, but hasn't gone to the full House. There's another bill that says no tax increase and no increase in charter and cyber charter costs. So you cap it at this year's cost. That's not as good as 9,500, but at least it's not going up even more. So that would be a kind of like a go-between deal. So there's a lot of finagling going on. They couldn't get it through the House Education Committee, so they ran it through the House State Government Committee, which is much more conservative. And so they're trying all the angles possible to get these packages out there. But there are certainly school districts that just can't survive without a tax increase because they have no reserves to lean on. So what we're telling them is, listen, everybody's trying like crazy, but don't tie our hands by making every single school district have to be bound by a zero when aid is getting cut in every which way or not. So we've asked, if you can't go with the governor's 9,500, at least can you freeze it as a next best option? So we keep working on that with PASBO and PASA and PSBA.
Yeah, there's also another House bill out there that's the part of the CARES 2 package. And I think we have to support that part of it, which talks about state and local aid and also educational aid. So there could be more coming, but we have to push for that.
Yeah, that's what do they call that? No, it's number 4. What do they call it, guys? It's bill number 4, but I don't know what they call it.
I just hearing it as CARES 2.
3.5, but I can't remember the terminology in front of the numbers. I don't know if it was it's not called surplus, but I forget what the feds call it. But yeah, in bill number 4, they're talking about money for state and local governments, because otherwise we're all going to have a world of hurt. I think Pennsylvania's talking a deficit between 4 and 9, New York somewhere between 10 and 16.
I was going to say, at least we're not in New York.
Yeah, that's right.
Really in trouble.
That's right.
You're really glad that you came to Pennsylvania now, John, right?
You better believe it.
I think it's House Resolution 6379. That's the one that I'd read last. Not sure if that's been updated or not, but that's what it was, 6379.
And one of the other things is we start at one of these budgets, the line by line budgets. You can't hardly probably see it, but we've started one of these, but we didn't finish it because there's so many moving parts. The idea is after we got done tonight, then we would take this back and tweak it so that we can get it out to you. so that you can look at the line by line by line. But you know, if you make a change in salary, it affects the salary line, it affects the PSERS line, the social security line, all those different things. So we have a draft, but we can then take this and tweak it. We don't have to start from scratch once we have some definitiveness tonight.
Thanks. Anyone else, any thoughts on what was presented tonight? All right. With that, we'll move on. And again, you know, we still have time. So if you have any questions or anything along those lines, Bill and John will be monitoring emails. So if there's any, just pass it along. With that, we want to move to the upcoming agenda. Does everybody have board docs open? I do not. Give everybody a second to pull that up. John, do you want to walk us through this upcoming agenda for next week?
Sure. We're a week ahead of schedule, so I want to thank Bill and his ladies for being able to get some of the financial stuff because it's the first week, not the second week. So they had to hustle to do that. So I thank them. You want to go to personnel items if anybody has questions? And then we can talk about the assistant principalship as well, because that's kind of confusing. So we can take some time, but it will go anything else under personnel first.
I was going over the new hires and there more than half of them are over $60,000 in salary. Can you tell us a little bit about these candidates and why they deserve to be above step one?
When we go out recruiting, we're never sure where people are going to be because we don't know who the candidates are going to be. Obviously, anytime you have a retirement and you have somebody being replaced, you should have a nice breakage between the retiree's salary and the first person's salary, or if you do it this way or this way. We've been out, you know, it was kind of weird. We didn't get to go recruiting this year. You know, all the recruiting fairs got canceled. So we had to do a lot of stuff virtually, and even all the interviews have been Zoom interviews. And I'm just looking for the appointments while I'm talking here. And okay, and then we have an unwritten rule since I've been here. We didn't used to follow this, but we have an unwritten rule now where we don't hire people above step 5 unless it would be something really bizarre, like maybe a calc or an engineering that we had to fill or something like that. So I finally found it. Yeah, I finally found it. Thank you. So what we did is we have an unwritten rule that we won't hire somebody above step 5. So sometimes we have people tell us no. But if you're on the appointments page, the appointment A is somebody with 2 years of experience who's coming from East Stroudsburg. So she'd be on step 3. Letter B is a younger teacher. 3, you remember this one, Peg? You did these interviews.
They're almost all the specialists. She has, I think 6 years of experience. We had one with 6. We had one that was over that had 7 years of experience. I'm just trying to think. I think that the English teacher, Joanne.
Yeah, well, just do C.
Okay.
You know, C is 60,000, right?
Right.
Instead of like 56,000. So she's got some experience.
And a master's.
Yep. And then D is in the 50s. E
Is
is
she
it?
coming from someplace else? The
She
family doing science?
taught a year in Honesdale and a year with us. She filled in this year as a long-term.
Okay.
She was home ec in the fall and Barb Brown in the spring.
Oh, okay.
And then E is an English teacher, actually a Delaware Valley graduate who's taught in Upper Darby for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So she's coming in at step 5. Item F is a math teacher from, who lives in the Wallenpaupack area, but teaches at Dallas right now. She has 7 years experience, but we only gave her 5.
Just masters.
As a master's plus 18. Haley Vogel G is special ed.
She also has 5 years of experience.
And then I think that's it for the teachers right now.
How are the pool of applicants for those positions? Will they all be virtual?
Actually, you know, the one we were most concerned about was family and consumer science because it's not a big field. And that one had 9 people in it. So, because we were worried that that would be the smallest, and 9 was the smallest, but we were really surprised that there were 9 people out there with the certification. So that's a really good thing in that respect. So there's a combination. There are a couple people with experience, and then there's some newbies.
The 2 that are to be determined, do you have people that you're looking at there, or they're just not ready to put a name in, or?
The one, yes, we've done the interviews for them. Well, we did first round with the secondary one, and we're doing, and we've done the second round with the secondary one, and they're just weren't ready for the appointment for tonight. They'll be on next week, and we're doing second rounds for the elementary special education position on Monday. So they should be ready for appointment next week.
They people with experience as well, or are they going to be, are they newer?
I'm trying, yes, the special ed high school position, yes, she's taught in Scranton for the last 5 years.
So she'll be up on step 5 as well.
And the elementary, I'm not sure yet because we haven't done the second interviews.
Okay.
Okay.
And under letter I, where there's a TBD replacing Al McElroy, that'll be Delaware Valley Elementary School, not Delaware Valley High School. That was a mistake.
It's just kind of unusual that none of them are on step 1. Usually you have a few on step 1.
Yeah, well, we thought, we theoretically, there could have possibly been 2 of them on step 1, but both of them worked all year for us as LTSs this year.
Okay.
So we were like, we have to give them step 2.
Yeah.
They've worked a whole year for us. That wouldn't be fair. And they both,
Especially under these circumstances, being a first-year teacher and picking.
Right, right.
so they got first-year teachers and they got thrown to the wolves doing online learning at the 4th quarter.
People were joking, saying, I bet Brown, what's her first name?
Barb.
Barb Brown was really glad she retired when she did.
And then let me explain the change of status. Okay, it's not listed on here, but it's the high school assistant principalship. They advertised the job and they looked at a big pool of people with the idea that the opening was because of, Diana Bixby moving to the supervisor of secondary special ed. So the opening was for the assistant principal at the high school for special ed. And one of our assistant principals said that, one of our current assistant principals, Jason Pope, said he'd be very interested in switching over to do that because he was the one who's filled in the last couple of years. Whenever Diana or Aaron were out, he's the one that's always handled it. And so Brian Blom said, well, let's put out an app or just see what we have for assistant principals. If we have someone that comes in that has special ed administration experience, Jason will stay where he is, and we put the new person that has special ed administrative experience in that spot. If we interview and there's just a bunch of good green people who might be good assistant principals, but may not have any background in special ed administration, then we'll let Jason slide over because he's a veteran. He's been doing it 6 or 7 years in the high school as an assistant principal. So what would happen is Jason, after we did all the interviews, we decided Jason would slide over and be the assistant for special education. And then the new person that gets hired would backfill for Jason, doing regular discipline and things of that nature. So when we got all done and we went through the pool, when we got to the end, the top candidates were all teachers looking to get into administration. We didn't have people with administrative experience that made it to the final round to even be considered for that. So we put somebody we thought it'd be better to have a rookie do in regular discipline than dealing with all the complications and nuances with special education. And it was really nice that we had somebody that was excited to do it. He came forward and said, I'd like to do it. I really enjoyed doing it when I filled in for Diana in the past years, or for Aaron. And Aaron was out, I think Aaron missed quite a few days, I think 30 some days 2 years ago, when his daughter was sick and they were in Wisconsin for surgery and stuff. So he got to fill in a lot that year. So, which was a good experience for him. So that's the idea, is that the new person would be in regular assistant principal and Jason would become the special ed assistant principal.
So I guess and I know that I was one of the board members that requested that we wait until the work session to discuss this. I know before I was a board member, I remember Pam and the board members that came before me fighting for to ensure that we had an assistant principal of special education at the high school level, to kind of really work on some issues that we had. So my concern is what's Jason's background in understanding special education law, because I think that's a really big component of that position. And
I think that, Jess, I hate to cut you off, but I think if we're going to discuss this any further, then we would need to go into executive session for personnel. So if you guys want to do that, then we could go over everything.
Why don't we look through the rest of the agenda if we could first, and then we could do that on the tail end if everybody's okay with that.
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I think what might be helpful too is if we, with the new appointees, what Rosemary was saying with the salaries that coming in, if we could get a listing of the salaries from the retirees that are going out. I mean, it says they replaced such and such, and then we could see what the savings was in each position, you know?
And those savings are all factored in on that long page.
Yeah, I mean, we have a listing of what salaries, what everybody's salaries are. I just don't know if it's accessible to everyone easily.
Mm-hmm. You didn't mow your grass yet, Jack. You're in the weeds.
Yeah, well, I've been kind of busy, John. It's just been a little hectic.
Approvals. Yeah, are they behind the appointments? Okay. So the last thing is the approvals. Does anybody have a question on the approvals?
Yeah, I know the elections office wanted to use our place on the 14th. Are we going to still be allowed to let them use that? It's on one of the approvals.
Yeah, because I think they consider that's deemed, having the election is deemed an essential service.
Okay.
And they're afraid that there's a lot of people that work elections that aren't capable or proficient with doing a Zoom. So they have to have a face-to-face place that would also allow them to have social distancing. And they don't really have a place at the county to have a big enough room to spread people out if they were to come. They're not sure how many people may come, but they wanted to be prepared for it. But yeah, because it's essential, we're okay.
Good. I'm not against them using it. I just want to make sure that we could facilitate them.
Sure. And then B is just the approval that we do every spring of the graduating class.
And John, on the graduating class, I know you sent me a message this earlier about Brian working with the senior officers to come up with something. Do you want to say anything on that right now?
Sure. The obviously there's 8 million ideas of what we should do, and I probably get 2 to 5 ideas daily. So I've been dumping them into a folder for the last month because everybody has ideas on what we should do. And I've been sharing a lot of them with Brian, and I had a long meeting, about 2.5 hours yesterday with Brian, Nicole Cosentino, and Jimmy Mitchell and I to talk about different options. And what we're going to do is the senior class officers and the student council officers are all seniors as well this year. So Brian's going to reach out to all of them and have a conversation with them about, here are all the different things that are out there. What are the things that are most attractive to you guys? Of those things that are attractive, are they logistically doable? And then they're going to come back to us with some ideas. But we really want those senior leadership kids to have a say. Of course, with technology, they can talk to all their friends practically instantaneously to get some quick feedback from all their, friend groups, thanks to the phones and social media. So probably that'll be next week. They'll be having conversations about what different options are there, what sounds attractive to the kids, and is it doable? And then we'll go from there. Because what's the doctor's name, head of the Department of Health? Dr. Levine said that even if you go from red to yellow, you can't have a traditional graduation.
Or yellow to red.
So when she said even yellow, you can't make accommodations, we're like, okay, now we gotta explore some of the alternatives, because we had even talked about spread the kids out 6 feet apart on the turf and maybe only give them 2 tickets and things of that nature. Of course, that causes family strife if they only have 2 tickets. But there's still the bottleneck of coming in, going out. It's almost impossible to have, 800 or 1,000 people in the bleachers and not have them violate social distancing, going up and down the aisles, coming through the gate and things of that nature. So seems like everybody's exploring alternatives. So that's what he's going to do with the senior leaders next week, is see what things are viable and of interest to them, because it's all about them. We want to try to make the best of a bad situation. They've lost so much this spring. So, and Kalahari's working with us with some options, believe it or not, with the water park, for some fun for the kids. It may not be a dress up prom, but there is a possibility of the water park for them. So.
You could dress up their bathing suits.
Sure, the voting. And then in addition, of course, to the voting on the budget, the last thing is approval of 2 people to be the voting delegates for PSBA 2020 Delegate Assembly. So we'll need 2 names for that. And currently it's who? Right now it's Dawn and Rosemary are the 2 for this year. And the PS.
Felicia ended up doing it.
Oh, Felicia filled in. And then.
But there's not going to be a PSBA, right?
There won't be a live thing. Probably, I'm thinking this delegate assembly will probably have to be in some kind of like a webinar, chat, Zoom type thing, since there isn't going to be a live conference in the fall.
I'm certainly willing to do it.
Thanks, Tom.
Do we have a date on that?
It's normally it's going to be usually it's the conference is the 3rd week in October. And now they were talking, originally they were going to move the conference from the end of the week to the beginning of the week,
Right.
like a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But now it's not a conference, it will just be a day with a meeting, I guess, is what it'll look like.
I mean, I'll do it if I'm here. I'm supposed to be in Israel around then, but who knows if I'll be in Israel.
And if they can't do it, I would love to do it. If I'm not representing the IU, I can then represent Delaware Valley.
Do we want to approve 2 with an alternate, just to cover ourselves on the agenda for next week?
Sure.
That's a good plan.
Who wants to be the alternate?
I'll be the alternate.
Okay, Rosemary said she'll be the alternate since she's got a trip and she's not sure about it. So we'll put Pam and Dawn and we'll plug in Rosemary as the alternate. That way we're really prepared.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for the agenda? Okay, I'll turn it back to you, Corey.
Yeah, and anybody else, any thoughts, comments, suggestions before we move into executive session?
I just have one thing, and it's getting back to the ESY, and I know probably John or Maria has probably heard from some parents because there are some very concerned about regression. I know you said the decision was made to do that online, but some of the kids who would normally qualify are not being successful online now. So they're not really going to get anything out of that. At what point, what do we need to happen? And at what point to be able to do a normal ESY program? Or a modified ESY program? But you know what I mean? Like what if we go to yellow in the next 5 weeks, does that give us the opportunity, even if it's a scaled down version, less kids, or I don't know how we would do it?
Yeah, and we originally asked Maria to build up 2 plans. Plan A, which is the normal face-to-face, and Plan B, which is the online, because we just didn't know what direction we're heading in. And then as we've progressed and they created this red, yellow, and green, and they left us in red, you know, we're a small county. Our numbers are not that, on raw numbers are not that shocking, but evidently as a percentage, because we're a small county, they must be a little more disturbing, because we were no way mentioned in some of the early groups of counties that would go to yellow. There's still a ton of restrictions with yellow, but the first thing, you're right, Dawn, is the first thing would have to happen is we got to get to yellow, and then you have all those social distancing restrictions and things like that. So far, everybody we talk to is doing online. The IU is doing it for all the other schools.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if we're working with Kalahari and it looks promising that the seniors are going to be able to have something over the summer before they go away in August to college, hoping everybody is back to normal by then.
Right.
I would think even if we had to do it later, I just
well, it's not a bad
and
idea.
especially when you've got those kids that are going from middle school to high school and they're missing that last quarter and they're missing the ESY and they're going to be going in at such a disadvantage.
Well, it's not a bad idea to explore the idea of, do we push it back a couple weeks? With the idea that if we push it back for a couple weeks, it just buys us more time. And then if we still have to do virtual, we still have, you know, our hands would be tied, but it would give us, if we do push it back from its regular where it always is in July, and we look to push it back a few weeks, that might buy us a little time.
And I think it's a play it by ear. I mean, I think by you know, the first week in June, we're going to have a better idea what July is going to look like. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I would appreciate, and I think a lot of parents would, if we can leave that a little fluid, you know, just to see if we can do something.
Maria, are we able to keep it open for a while?
I'm not sure about that.
Can you look and see when would when would be the drop dead date, and we can we'll work backwards from there?
Yes.
We'll have to appoint the people at the June board meeting, right? Or do we not appoint them for that?
If we are hiring somebody who doesn't currently work for us or is a sub, we do approve them.
Okay.
That's the big question, to have sufficient staff.
Right.
And I have a feeling many of the students who traditionally qualify for ESY may not opt to come because of medical fragility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I on here? Okay. Sorry, I lost my screen. Yeah, and I think that because I think you will definitely have that. You will have some parents who, even if they could come, will be holding them back out of fear. But then for those who wouldn't be, maybe it would make it even more possible for us to work with them.
I think it's a very fair request.
Like homebound instruction?
Say again, Rosemary?
Would it be possible to do something like a homebound instruction?
If the governor allows face-to-face.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And obviously we would need those caveats first. We need to be able to do it. But if we're able, I think we should make every effort to try. And actually, Rosemary, that's a good idea.
I mean, rather than bringing a bunch of kids together, if we had the staff to be able to do it, it might be more effective to have them go to that particular child's home and work with them at home.
That would be a far more expensive proposition
Right.
because
But
you're
it,
providing one-on-one for every student.
one-on-one instruction.
It wouldn't actually be homebound, it would be in-home. Homebound is a medical-based need.
Right. It would be in home. It would be over the summer, but it might help with the second piece of the unknown for the compensatory education.
Potentially, yeah.
Just something to please consider
Know
and
how much wiggle
thank
room
you.
we can give ourselves before we have to make another line in the sand, okay?
It's definitely worth looking into. I mean, in all fairness, it's not going to hurt to postpone it for a little bit of time. And you know, another concern is we're going to have to follow this latest information as to what's happening with the children and this new type of virus around. So there's a lot of big considerations before we bring kids together, especially those who have compromised, you know, situations.
So
Yeah,
I would
and
just-
our team has, our team has
no.
tossed around all sorts of different options and we have 3 different scenarios running. So we anticipated hearing something tomorrow as to what will happen with summer programming. I don't know if we're going to hear that or not.
is that
My
the-
only, my only concern about sending an educator into a home is, are we sending them into harm's way? What would be the protocol at this point?
The first protocol, Jack, is for the governor to put us into yellow.
Right.
Yeah, but he's talking about making sure that no one else in the house is positive, you know,
Exactly.
Yeah.
because that's why we got rid of all home instruction for the 4th marking period. You know,
I think it'd be a consideration.
unknowingly put somebody in harm's way.
Well, you could do a one-on-one in a school building. Don't provide busing. Parents have to drop them off, whatever the case may be. I think you're probably going to have some parents very willing to participate in whatever they have to do to help get the kids up to speed. But you know, this whole thing about risk, and that's really a loose bunch of balls bouncing around as to what risk you have, where you are, what you're touching, what you're doing, what you're breathing. Everybody has a different opinion on that. And I'm talking about the professionals. But there's always going to be amount of risk until this thing is eradicated one way or the other. So, you know,
Well,
school opens up, there's a risk.
Well, here's what we'll do. We'll work with Maria to come up with the last possible date that we have to make a decision, because anytime we can buy ourselves, it may make it a heck of a lot clearer, you know, in the course of time. Who knows how this red to yellow and everything may roll out.
Right.
Seems like a lot of things are loosening up pretty quickly. So we'll work with her and say, okay, this will buy us another X number of weeks before we have to have a drop dead date to make a decision. And we'll go from there.
I was going to say, I think that at our June board meeting, I think that we're going to have a lot more information about where the rest of the state is and where we may potentially be. So I think that we can have a lot of conversation, and I don't disagree that any, you know, outside of the box ideas that we can come up with now are certainly worthwhile. And I absolutely think that anything that we can do to make sure that ESY is in person and to give those kids the best chance of making up some of the ground that they've lost during this time is important to do. But I also think that, you know, right now we're just guessing. I mean, we're throwing, you know, the grass up into the wind and seeing which way it blows. I think that in June we'll have a much better, clearer idea of where we might be in July or August. So I think that, you know, as long as I think perhaps, you know, getting something out there to those parents, but the fact that we're not giving up hope for in-person ESY is important, because I think that's a big component of this. But I do think that Dawn is right. And I think that, as well as Maria, that, you know, I think waiting until our June meeting to have a further discussion about what potentially we could do with ESY is important. Because I think that right now, I think we just have no idea what we're going to do in July or August. We don't know what we're doing in September at this point. So there's no point in guessing right now.
Well,
Absolutely.
we'll have to make a decision a little bit before that June meeting because we potentially will have to put names on the board packet.
So could we do it for our June work session? And just
Sure.
it at the work
So
session?
that's sooner. We would drag our feet to the June voting meeting.
Right, so if we talked about it again at the June work session, as far as if we're going to do it in person,
Yeah.
give us another week to determine, do you know what I mean? Like before,
Why is this a month?
as to whether we need to put those names on the board packet or not. It still gives us another month. I mean, if we'll, you know, tomorrow 24 counties go to yellow, you know, in another month, we may be at yellow already, and, you know, potentially some counties in the state might be at green, but we just don't know that yet. So I feel like at least giving some parents some hope is important, but I also think that, you know, this just isn't something that we can decide tonight or tomorrow. I think that we at least need to wait till June to even have a worthwhile discussion as to what we can even potentially do.
And I have to agree. I mean, it's not just the schools. We have a number of other businesses out there in the community whose livelihood is based upon children, and we don't know what's going to happen. We're sitting here every day wondering, are our children coming back? When? Will, you know, every day our plan changes. How are we going to address the needs? Safety is first. For me, we need to move out of red. It's a huge responsibility when you work with children so closely. So our direction will come from the governor. And I assume it's going to be the same for Delaware Valley. When we move from red to yellow, we'll put our plans together.
Thanks for looking into that, John and Maria. Anybody else, anything before we move into executive? All right. With nothing out there, we'll move into executive, which really means we just stay here and Dylan stops straight.
Yeah, let's take 2 minutes